Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You sanctify us with commandments, and you command us to embark on the journey of give and take with Torah. So this week's Torah portion, the Parashat HaShavua, the Torah portion of the week, is Tissa. As usual, we're looking at the Commentator's Bible, edited by Michael Karasik, with our handy-dandy English translations of the Jewish Publication Society from 1917 and 1985, and with commentaries of a variety of people. The famous ones are these four: Rashi, Rashbam, Ibn Ezra, and Nachmanides, and then there are a whole bunch of others. We are going to look in particular at this interaction tonight. This interaction is right after Moses convinces God not to wipe out the Israelites. Why was God wanting to wipe out the Israelites? Well, because the Israelites had done the whole thing with the golden calf. So this is, really at the center of this God-Moses relationship. And Moses says to God here, so this is the opening. So we're in Exodus chapter 33, verse 12, so well into the Parsha. And this verse is here in the Hebrew, Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, and Moses says to God, Re'e ata omer elai, look, you said to me, Ha'al et ha'am hazeh, lead this people, or raise this people even. But you haven't made known to me the person that you're sending with me. In other words, you're not giving me a whole lot of reassurances here. I don't have like a real sense of who's my helper here, you God. I don't feel like we're in it together yet. And you said, I have known you singly, right, by name. It says further you said, I know you by name. Over here it says that. I have singled you out by name, it says over here. So there's like, so Moses is expressing, you've said we've got this thing going on. That you know me intrinsically and I know you. And also, v'gam matzata chen, and also you have found favor, grace, be'enai, in my eyes. So to find grace in one's eyes is this high praise, right? So Moses says, look, you've said all these things. You've said, I know you, we're in this together, and that I found grace in your eyes, all this good stuff. So, okay, where's the meat? And then Moses continues, Moses talking to God, V'ata imna matzati chen be'enecha, if please, I have found favor in your eyes. Hodi eni na, let me know you. Let me know et dirachecha, your way, va'eda acha, so that I can know lema'an emsachen be'enecha, so that I may know you and continue to be somebody who finds favor in your eyes. Ur'e ki emech hagoy hazeh, and consider, look, this too is your nation. I'm asking for some help in doing this task that you've given me. I want some real, together time, as it were. And Vayomer, and God said, Panai yelechu v'hanichoti lach. I will go, my face will go in the lead, and I will lead before you, right? I will lighten your burden, is what it says on this side of the page. On this side, on the right side, it says, My presence will go with thee, and I will give you rest, which is really closer to what it says there. But it is my face, interestingly enough, will go with you, v'hani choti, and I will relax. I will cause you comfort. Vayomer elav, and Moses responded to God, Im ein panecha holchim, unless your face goes, your presence, if your presence doesn't go with me, al te'elechu, al ta'alenu mizeh, don't raise us up from here. Uvemeh yivadeh efo ki matzati chen be'enecha, and in how is it that I'm going to know that we've gained favor, that your people has gained, I have gained favor in your eyes. Ani va'amecha, I and your people. Halo belechecha imanu, belechtecha imanu. Only if you go with us. V'nifleinu ani va'amecha mikol ha'am asher al pnei adama, so that we may be distinguished, so that we may stand out, I and your people, from all the other people who are on the face of the earth. So this is Moses' appeal. Moses has gotten God to save the Israelites, gotten God to not wipe them out for the sin of the golden calf. And now Moses is like, really, we're in need here. We need you to go with us in some tangible way. We need to feel that you're along for the ride here. You're sending us on this journey, and we can't do it without you with us. So what does God respond to this impassioned appeal by the person who is closest to God? Vayomer Adonai Moshe, gam et hadavar hazeh asher dibarta e'aseh. And God says to Moses, also this thing which you have spoken, I will do. Ki matzata chen, because you have found favor, found grace, be'enai, in my eyes, ba'ada'acha b'shem, and I know you by name, or I've singled you out by name, as the other side says. Vayomer har'eni na et kivodecha, and Moses says to God, show me your presence, please. Show me your glory. Your kavod is your honor. It's glory, translated as glory, but really it's like your weight. Show me your the substance of you, the heaviness of you, and God says in return, Vayomer ani a'avir kol tovi al panecha. I myself, I will make pass all of my goodness before you. V'karati b'shem Adonai lefanecha, and I will call out in the name of Adonai before you. So this is God saying, I'm going to call out in the name of God. And v'chanoti et asher achon, and I will grace you with the grace, right? I'll be compassionate. I'm going to do this big show, right? And show you compassion. Urichamti et asher arachem, and I will be merciful with great mercy. All of these verbs and nouns and subjects are repeating. So this is, I will, this, v'chanoti et asher achon, I will grace you, grace that which I will grace. Urachamti et asher arachem, and I will be merciful on that for that I have mercy. So there's a lot of repetition. In English, it doesn't sound good. In Hebrew, it's very elevated language. It's this language of emphasis coming from God. And God says, God continues to say to Moses, Vayomer, and God says, but, because there's always a but, right? Lo tuchal lerot et, you cannot see et panai, my face, ki lo yira'ani ha'adam v'chai, because no man can see me and live. And so what does God do instead? God says, Vayomer Adonai, and God says, Hine makom iti, there is a place beside me, with me. V'nitzavta al hatzor, put yourself, stand up on the rock. V'haya ba'avor kavodi, and I will make pass my presence, my honor, my glory. And v'samticha b'nikrat hatzor, and I'll put you in this. I'm going to put you in a little cleft of the rock. V'shakoti kapi, and I'm going to cover you with my hand. Alecha, on you. Ad ovri, until I have passed. So I'm going to show up. I'm going to put you on the rock. I'm going to place you in a cleft, and I'm going to cover up the cleft. And then v'hasiroti et kapai, and I'm going to let go my hand, v'ra'ita, and you will see et achorai, my back. Because, so you're going to see my back, because ufanai lo yera'u, but my face will not be seen. So this is this dramatic encounter, right? We've got all of this stuff going on. We've got the golden calf, we've got plagues, we've got Moses appealing to the divine, saying, please, God, save these people. And then at the end, it's almost like they've come to this point, the negotiations have ceased, it's gotten a little calm, and they go, and Moses, and they have this intimate moment of Moses saying, please, God, this thing that you're asking me to do is so difficult. Can you give me a little something here? Can you show me a little bit something? Can you come with me? And God says, yes, I'm going to come with you, and I'm going to show you as much as I can, but you can't see, but what you're asking for, this face-to-face, is not allowable, because no man can see me and live. No person can see me and live. And this is very interesting because, of course, at the end of the Torah, in Deuteronomy, much later on, what do we have? We have the declaration that at the end of Deuteronomy, there will be no prophet like Moses again, who spoke with God face to face. So we have a little sort of back and forth in the Torah itself about what this means. So clearly, the relationship in general is a face-to-face relationship, but the physical encounter between God and Moses is not. So we have a lot going on here. We also have this idea, of course, if we want to evaluate it from a textual basis, we know that the likelihood is that the people who wrote Exodus and the people who edited the entirety of the Torah and then wrote Deuteronomy are not the same people. That the editors, the compilers of Torah, we theorize, also probably wrote Deuteronomy as sort of this closing book, and they also sewed the rest together, and that Exodus is not written necessarily by the same people. So they do a good job of weaving it all together and making it seem like a whole, but there are places where it doesn't necessarily feel that way, because they were human too. All right. Questions before we go to Viva Gottlieb Zornberg, who has some really interesting things to say about this, because of course, this is this pinnacle of the God-Moses relationship. It's really as close as they get. And yeah, Barbara.
Well, isn't this sort of implying that when Moses was by himself with God on the mountain, that he may have at that time been face to face?
No, never, right? So it's quite clear that whatever presence God and Moses is talking to is not the actual essence of the divine. And we have this very anthropomorphic moment here where God says, I'm going to show up like in person. Like, it's not just going to be, you know, like a light talking from somewhere. I'm really going to be there, all there. And the authors of Torah give God a body at this moment. God has a back. God has a face. God has a hand. It's very anthropomorphic. And it's very not the way we're accustomed to thinking about God, but here it is, right? And of course, it's not the way Jews talk about God. We don't talk about God as having a physical presence. Could God have a physical presence? Well, God is God. God can do what God wants. However, we don't imagine God in this way. We have a progressive theology that, you know, evolves over time, and this is this one moment, and it's not the eternal national moment of thinking about God. We would have Maimonides tell us incredibly different things about God than this, and so this is we have this very powerful encounter, and it's very personal. Maimonides says that all of these encounters are in dreams, that these are not, in fact, physical encounters, that all of our prophets, when they describe God this powerfully, they're having a personal encounter in their own heads. Well, just to make things more interesting. Yes, questions?
Could be the same people writing the book. Okay, they just were not on weed at this particular time.
We're hopeful that they were not, in fact, taking any enhancing substances. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say that there aren't at least metaphorical references to the hand of God. Is it my imagination, or have I heard that at least a few times?
Oh no, there's tons of anthropomorphic references to God that are metaphorical. God brings Israel out of Egypt with a strong arm and an outstretched hand, all this sort of stuff. Yes, God is spoken about in the 5 books of Moses as having, in Torah proper, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, as having bodily properties. But those don't stand up to the way we talk about God theologically through the ages. That's not the way Jews talk about God, for the most part. We understand God to be abstract, and yes, as you just said, that these images are metaphors.
Okay, so at the same time, he's abstract and metaphorically anthropomorphic, right? And that's what we're saying.
We're holding a lot of different ideas in our head at the same time. You got it.
Okay, they're rapidly falling out of mine, but at least they're in yours. Okay.
Well, we may be chasing them around in our head, but
okay. All right, very good. Thank you.
Of course. So what does this look like in Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg? And I apologize to Larry Rubin. You may have studied this text with me at a certain point in the past. Hopefully it won't be boring, but it's nice to have you here. And Bobby Handel as well, and Dorinda, it's great. So Bob said, thank you for clarifying all the back face idea of God, which, as you said, is the essence of God. Yeah, look, Bob, this is a very strange encounter. So here we have Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg in the middle of her chapter on this parsha, talking about the renewed covenant, vision and effacement. Moses's response, a summary. So this is Moses's response to God in this whole big thing, right? What then is Moses's response? Or to phrase the question differently, what is the purpose of extending the narrative of prayer, punishment, and forgiveness over so many scenes beyond the core narrative at the top of the mountain? If we outline the events ensuing on the smashing of the tablets, right? So Moses smashes the tablets and breaks the golden calf, forces the Israelites to drink the shattered calf, all that sort of stuff. We produce the following summary. Moses burns the golden calf and forces people to drink its dissolved powder. He interrogates Aaron, who weakly replies. He invites the Levites, who proclaim themselves for God, to kill the guilty Israelites, 3,000 of them. He accuses the people of their great sin and returns to the mountaintop to intercede again for them. God threatens punishment of the guilty, withdraws God's presence from the people, and sends a plague against the guilty. God repeats that an angel will now replace God in leading the people. The people mourn their loss. Moses withdraws from the camp, sets up his tent of assembly outside the camp, the people watching from the rear as he recedes to his tent to speak with God. Moses intercedes again. God accedes to his prayer. Moses asks to see God's glory. God refuses to show God's face, but agrees to let Moses see his back in the crevice, from the crevice in the rock. Moses is told to hew out a new set of stone tablets on which God will again inscribe the words of the covenant. As he gives Moses these second tablets, God speaks God's 13 attributes. Moses again prays for God. So that's the moment where on the High Holy Days, for those of you who have been to synagogue on the High Holy Days, where we chant Adonai, Adonai El Rafum V'Chanun. Those are the qualities of the divine, the attributes. Larry Rubin says, and yet we have the Hamsa. The Hamsa, for those of you who don't know, is the hand symbol, right? Which is a Middle Eastern good luck charm. It is not a uniquely, exclusively Jewish symbol. The Hamsa is used by a lot of different Middle Eastern folk traditions. So like a lot of other things in Judaism, we syncretized it. We brought it in from other outside religions and thought it was a good luck charm. All right, and Larry also says, the good Old Testament vengeful God, is God forgiving us, or are we forgiving God? Oh yes, well that's a very interesting question. Is God forgiving us, or are we forgiving God? Well, that's a constant conundrum back and forth, right? In this encounter right here, right, where we have, Moses praying, and again, this paragraph continues. Moses again prays for God to lead the people, and God renews God's covenant. Finally, Moses descends from the mountain with a second set of tablets, unaware of the light irradiating his face. He speaks to the people and then covers his face with a veil. This becomes a pattern of veiling and unveiling in Moses's future encounters with God and the people. So the people need to forgive God because God has just wiped out a whole bunch of them. God needs to forgive the people because they strayed with the golden calf. We need to forgive God constantly because we keep on saying, God, you told us if we did good in the world, then you would bless us, but we keep on suffering and we can't figure out what we're not doing right. And because historically we have this simplistic reward and punishment idea with God, which actually doesn't work. And so we develop a different theology over time. So it turns out as Larry put it, the vengeful Old Testament God becomes a different type of God over the course of Jewish history. We are not attached to this reward and punishment God because that God doesn't reflect the reality that we live. And so we develop a theology, and we talked about this on the Wednesday afternoon class, where we don't see a one-to-one correspondence between our deeds and our fate. And so that's a drastic change. Going back to Moses and Deuteronomy, right? We have at the end of Deuteronomy, chapters and chapters of blessings and curses. If you behave, you will get blessings. If you behave inappropriately, you will get curses. And this goes back and forth for chapters. And yet, turns out there's no behaving well enough to not have the Persians come and the Babylonians come and destroy the temple, or the Romans come and destroy the temple, or the Romans come and persecute us after the Bar Kokhba revolt. We can't seem to get it right. And so through the course of Jewish history, we create a different God model. Our theology evolves. So the question that we're going to be asking now is, given our evolving theology, what do we do with this whole encounter here? How do we cope with what the Torah is talking about? How does our evolution as thinkers about this change how we read it? So even in this brief summary, Professor Gottlieb Zornberg continues, Moses clearly emerges as the one constant figure in the multiple dialogues of the narrative. Repeatedly, he prays to God and presses for his desire, may God go in our midst, and minimizes God's partial concessions. He offers to sacrifice his own personal destiny, which has been a theme throughout that Professor Gottlieb Zornberg continues to come back to. His narcissistic interest in his own narrative. He says, erase me from your book. In effect, he sacrifices the conventional, narratively gratifying pose of martyr prophet, the Sturm und Drang of an epic role. In other words, Moses is like, get me out of here. Don't make this about me. Let me go, if only you will leave this people alone. Right? And this is really one of the things that's very beautiful about Professor Gottlieb Zornberg's commentary is he refuses to play such a role because it casts the people into the corresponding role of villain. Instead, he volunteers to be entirely effaced from the narrative. Or when that offer is rejected, he enters a dance with God and the people, a dance in which his back, not his face, is seen by the people, and in which God's back, not God's face, is seen by Moses. Ultimately, in the second version of the covenant, and as a sign of God's renewed presence, Moses brings another set of tablets and a face radiating light, which is sometimes seen and sometimes effaced. Moses is hidden and obscured from the people. God is hidden and obscured from Moses. And we have this back and forth that allows Moses to negotiate with God in such a way that Moses never blames the people, because Moses won't let God make the Israelites into the villain. Moses won't let God make the Israelites into bad people who deserve punishment. So here is our little answer, a little bit of an answer to the reward and punishment conundrum, which is the Israelites have done wrong, but they made mistakes. Give them a break. We're human. Don't take it out on them. And thus, we focus on the grace and the compassion and the mercy of the divine, that the world turns out to be better than we give it credit to, even though we suffer. And so we have a nuanced reading through the history of Judaism that allows us to begin to connect with the softer side of God, as opposed to the vengeful side of God. Thoughts or questions before we move on? Because here we get to the drama. Right? This is the pivotal moment which we've read and looked at. And of course, we're not gonna be able to look away, as it were. Right? So please show me your glory. The center of gravity in the narrative is the moment when Moses apparently interrupts his project of intercession. Right? So Moses stops pleading on behalf of the Israelites and instead asks God for this personal revelation. Please show me your glory. In fact, this is not an interruption, but a coda to a successful prayer. Okay, so what's a coda? Anybody know the musical term of a coda? So in musical settings, Occasionally there is a part that is not the chorus, but the coda, which is a slightly different ending that is clearly the ending. So we'll go through a song, right? And we'll come to the chorus. We'll go through it again and we'll come to the chorus. And then suddenly at the end of the next chorus, we'll hit a coda, which sounds like the chorus, but in fact is the ending. And it's this little bit. And so this is the coda. It's not an interruption. It's the end of Moses has successfully prayed, interceded on behalf of the Israelites. God has agreed, has ceded to Moses' desire that God go with us. God says to Moses, even this thing that you have spoken, I shall do. We read that. This word that you have said, I will do it, for you have found favor in my eyes. And then Moses pushes his luck, right? Essentially, the golden calf narrative might have ended at this point, says Professor Gottlieb Zornberg, but inspired by his success, Moses continues, please show me your glory. And God replies enigmatically, how is it different than a denouement? It's pretty much the same, says Bob. Coda is a musical denouement. So, and this is the bit we read somewhat closely, and with the Hebrew, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name of God and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. And God said, you cannot see my face, for a person may not see me and live. And God said, see, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. This is the point where the narrative digresses. And again, recognize that digressions in the Torah are rare, because the Torah doesn't like go on and on. It's not a digressing document. It's pretty much a, just the facts man type of document. And here we have like a lot of other stuff. Apparently so this is where the narrative digresses from the agenda of national forgiveness and renewal to the private mystical concerns of Moses. Moses wants something personal here. God's face and God's back become literalized in a way that even the revelation at Mount Sinai has not approached, right? At no point up until this time do we have and John, you are right, there are plenty of metaphorical appearances of God's body parts in other places, but here in this moment, we've got all of it coming together, like God's bodily there. Not just metaphorically, but like really, like back, front, and hand.
Yeah, I've never heard a reference to God's back before. That was a surprise.
It is surprising, to say the least, and it's quite literal. So, Professor Gottlieb Zornberg isn't making this up, right? So we've got God's face, God's back become literalized in a way that even the revelation at Mount Sinai has not approached. God's hands will cover Moses' face and will uncover it. He will see one part of God, but not the other. A specific sense of body is deployed to suggest a mystical vocabulary that alone can convey the ineffable. This is Moses's most personal prayer. God's fullest response is to pass by his face and call out God's 13 attributes. Immediately, Moses falls to the ground in obeisance and presses his last prayer on God. So that we didn't read this. This is afterwards. If I have gained your favor, O God, please let God go in our midst, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your own. Here, Moses resumes his role as intercessor, apparently repeating his previous petition. To this last prayer, God responds by renewing the covenant and teaching Moses its laws. So, and by the way, if you're wondering how this fits into the narrative over time, we can definitely see why Rashi and others tried to place this before the giving of the rules of the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, because how is God going to go with the Israelites? Now that Moses has made this petition in the holy tent that they are going to make for God. But the holy tent needs to come now, not in the chapters before when the laws are given. Larry, that's beautiful. Larry says it's a metaphor for studying Torah. We can never know the entirety. That's right. We don't get to see the whole face of God in the Torah. We only get to see little bits and pieces. And we turn it around and we come back every year and we get to see something else. So here, Professor Gottlieb Zornberg is going to go back to her normal mode of questioning on this sort of stuff, which is structure. She says, the question of structure emerges with compelling force. How does Moses's desire for personal mystical revelation mesh with the narrative of sin and forgiveness, right? What's it doing here? We've got Moses appealing to God on behalf of the Israelites. And then suddenly Moses says, now can I have can I get enlightenment here? I want to see God now. This other stuff is very nice, but in between saving the people and all this sort of national salvation and not killing us all off, please give me some, real personal God stuff. It is remarkable that while Moses speaks in the first person singular when he asks for the vision of God's glory, he modulates the first person plural in verse 9. If I have gained your favor, let God go in our midst, pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your own. At the culmination of Moses's work of prayer, he identifies with the sin of the people. Quietly, undramatically, the pronouns change. The fire in his bones is by this point so thoroughly integrated that it sparks out unself-consciously in his syntax. Apparently minor inflections of his voice manifest his solidarity with his people and his transcendence of paranoid and narcissistic postures. Moses has found his own voice in the thin silence. He speaks with a quiet normalcy that seems to emerge seamlessly from the vision he has just experienced. So here, Moses goes back and forth. If I have gained favor, so Moses personifies the people, come with us and go in our midst, not in a grandiose way, but in a representative way, in a way that says, I am taking responsibility. In the denouement, in the coda here, Bob, we've got Moses really sort of accomplishing this grand rhetorical flourish, this great advocacy, this argument of advocacy on behalf of the people that says, I am with them and use my merit to join all of us together. See us as one. I and we, not the royal we, but I, who is responsible as one of the people. Again, going back to some of our questions about how is Moses humble? Well, I'm reading a very interesting book by Adam Grant called Think Again. And he talks about the importance of confident humility. That we have to be confident in our abilities to do good in the world, to do something, but skeptical of our tools, because our tools can be updated and change. So we can't feel like we've got all the answers, but we can feel like we're capable to pursue them. And so in this middle ground between, arrogance, we have confident, a better form, confidence, and between sort of a lacking of ego, call it an imposter syndrome, we've got humility. So we talk about this confident humility, and it's kind of personified here. Moses doesn't say, do it because of me. Moses says, I'm here and on account of us, which is beautiful. And of course, his reference, as Professor Gottlieb Zornberg continues, to our sin is set in high relief against his earlier pronouns, reproaching the people he used the rhetoric of you, I, you have sinned, I shall go up, I shall atone for your sin. Pleading with God, Moses spoke of this people and their sin and erased me. It is only in the prayer that leads to the vision of the cave and to God's final forgiveness that Moses begins to modulate from I to we. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth? God's reply still focuses on Moses' personal grace as the reason for God's favor. Only after the revelation does Moses make the last movement to full solidarity with the people, pardon our iniquity and our sin. So Moses makes this move. And when Moses has gotten to the point where Moses is confident of God, then Moses incorporates himself into the people. It is no longer their sin, it is our sin. What a powerful transformation. Why does Moses think that he alone can atone for the sins of so many? Well, Bob, so that's an interesting point. Going back to that moment, Moses absorbs God, the focus of God's anger, by saying, it's their sin, and I'm going to atone for them because I know you like me. Do it for me. Don't punish them. I'm not a problem. I'll stand in for them, right? So Moses creates this early on in the argument. Moses is creating the separation. It is they who sinned. I'm gonna guarantee them. I am not a sinner. Don't take out your anger on them. I'm going to stand in the way. But by the end, Moses has convinced God, it's all of us. It's not me and them. It's not even you and me and them. It's all of us in it together. And think about this as a model for really teaching. I mean, we want to talk about what's useful for this, what's relevant. Let's talk about this as a model for conflict resolution. We exist, Larry asks, how has this affected our faith DNA? Do we have some sort of faith passed on component of taking responsibility for everybody and attempting to deflect the blame? It's an interesting question, but I think what I was hoping to say, or maybe even focus on here as well, Larry, is this idea that we have a tendency to place ourselves in the role of Moses when we think we're blameless, and in the role of the people when we think we've done wrong. Right? So we as Israelites, and we as descendants of Israel, get to play both sides of the coin. Right? Either I'm going to be arguing on behalf of these terrible people and I'm not of them, or I'm one of the terrible people, forgive me because I've made mistakes. And depending upon the situation, one of those arguments works better than the other. But if we place ourselves, instead of selecting which of these positions is the most advantageous, instead say, we are all of these positions. At any given time, we are God who is angry and pissed off that everybody does wrong and never listens to me. We are Moses who is caught in the middle, trying to figure out how to appease the higher power and also get everybody to come along together and be in it all together. And we are the Israelites, impatient and scared and afraid and on the outside looking in to things that we don't understand. And that the answer to this is not which one of these positions is the best position for me to argue from right now, but rather, how can I sympathize with everyone as being in one of these positions at any given time? How can I see myself as the generous, forgiving God, the generous, unifying Moses, and the generous people who are willing to take God back? As Larry had pointed out, the people have to forgive God. After all, God just wiped out a whole bunch of them. And to see that everybody at the conversation is one of those people. So Steve asks, isn't there commentary that the Jewish people were not the first to be offered the Torah, but the last? Other peoples turned it down because it was too demanding. It's no wonder that there have been some issues. No one else wanted it. Yes, there's this story where God goes to, the Babylonians and says, there's no murder in here. And the Babylonians say, no, we're attached to murder. And God goes to the Romans and says, there's no adultery in here. And the Romans said, no, we're too attached to adultery. And God goes to the Egyptians and says, there's no theft in here. And they say, no, we're too attached to stealing and slavery. And finally, God goes to the Israelites, and the Israelites say that phrase that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Na'aseh v'nishma. We don't need to see what's in it. We're going to do it, and then we'll hear. And that what is powerful about the Israelite attachment to God is when God says, look, I've got an offer. We say, oh, you're God, let's do it. Not, let's look under the hood. And so, yeah, Steve, absolutely. So there is this, call it this growing pains in figuring out what it is we're supposed to be doing. And we also, as traditional commentators, go back and forth. We struggle back and forth with saying, okay, are we going to sympathize with Moses's difficulty of being, the go-between here? Are we going to, as we have done before, say, hey, wait a second, the Israelites are justified in being skeptical, right? That they're not so stiff-necked, they're just worried, and they were slaves and they don't know where they're coming from. Or are we going to sympathize with God, who keeps on running up against people who seem to not understand that, after all, God is God? Don't you understand? I know what's going on, says God. Why won't you listen to me? You keep on screwing up. And you're supposed to get it. If I say it, it's the way things work. And I have to say, as parent to a 7-year-old, I get God's perspective on this. The number of times I say, kids, things were going so well. We were having such a good time. Why did you just have to screw it up? I found myself saying something very like that about an hour and a half ago. Right? We have this notion that our perspective is so clear that if only people could see from inside our heads and see what we see, they would understand. Except that's not the way things work. It's not even the way things work for God. And I can repeat myself over and over again. I can say, this is the way it is. I can say, I only wanted, a couple of moments where things were working well. Please let it work out for like these moments. And suddenly I'm no longer relaxed because it's not working out that way. And I'm not so good at seeing it from somebody else's perspective at that moment, because I'm pretty upset about having lost out on whatever it is that I wanted for that 5 minutes. And so the Torah is right in there with us, giving us at least 3 different ways into trying to figure out how to get along better with each other, understanding that there is no time at which there isn't a drastic power differential between any of us. We don't come to any relationships in our lives as absolute equals. Larry says, God shouldn't have done the flood thing. God lost credibility. Well, yes, God definitely decided that the alpha test wasn't working out, and God was going to go with the beta model at that moment. But you know, there's the, and we don't do that as parents either, right? We don't say, I'm sorry, all my kids are crap, I'm starting over. Right? That where God serves as both a positive and a negative role model for personal behavior. Moses serves as the same. And I think to see Moses as growing in his role here, as learning, as figuring out that, and I really like this image that Professor Gottlieb Zornberg uses, where she says Moses refuses to make the people into a villain. He has an insight in that moment that says, we're not going to work this relationship out if any one of us is the bad guy. We can't engage in a healthy dynamic if we're going to stereotype or paint each other as always one way or another. We have to give each other the benefit of the doubt that we made a mistake and we can grow and we can do better next time. And in fact, that this may be the lever with which we use to move the theology of reward and punishment into a higher idea of us and the universe as well. Steve says, regarding what we were saying earlier about the metaphors giving God human features like an outstretched arm or an angry God, isn't that the difference between the Greeks and the Jews? Greeks saw gods in the image of man, and the Jewish view is of man in the image of God. Well, certainly Greeks had a tendency to attribute human attributes, including human frailties, to the universe. Whereas there is a tendency among Jews that when we do that, we're using the universe as a teaching, right? As striving to do better. What's brilliant about ancient Greek literature is the progress that humans can make. But the gods are static. The gods don't learn, they don't grow. They are forces of nature. And what's different about the Jewish God is dynamic. God is, when God speaks to Moses and all the Greek gods had human form. Yes, but they could change forms. They weren't stuck in their forms, right? Otherwise, Zeus wouldn't have had offspring with as many different creatures as Zeus did. So God appears to Moses and says to Moses, Ayah Asher Ayah, I will be what I will be. That God's name is literally the future tense of the to be verb. That God is this dynamic idea. And what's interesting is that allows us to be in relationship with God as both individuals and a people and a divinity, all of whom are growing. And that's what we see in this moment with Moses and God and the people, that we have the individual encounter with God, the personal spiritual moment, enmeshed in the national moment of fate, all with this idea that both person and community and God need to be represented in our ideas. That when I hold myself to a high standard, I am thinking a lot of things about where those standards come from. Is this standard a communal model for behavior? These are the norms of the group that I belong to. Is this standard a personal, spiritual standard for behavior? This is what I'm striving to do. And is this standard a universal standard? Is this something that I ought to be striving for because I imagine it as connected to a very principle of the way things ought to work? Bob says that is really interesting, and I never have heard or thought about God as a future tense of the verb to be. Well, yes, that's what we've got. The name Adonai in Hebrew that we say Adonai is the unpronounced, is literally my Lord, and it's what we say in place of the name that we don't pronounce, the Yud He Vav He name, which looks like a form of the to be verb. Not only that, it looks like to be in the future and the past and the present at the same time, kind of. It looks like a present imperfect participle.
Where does Shem fit into that scheme?
Shem is the word for name.
Oh, just name.
So when people say Hashem, they are saying the name.
That's the name.
Right? My favorite name for God is Hamakom, the place, which is the idea that any place becomes the place if we behave godlike in that place. If we strive for better behavior in a place, we turn the place into God.
So is this something that you learned, or was that passed on? I mean, is that an innovation of yours, or was it passed on to you?
Oh, no. That's good Jewish thinking. Hamakom comes from, no. I mean, that's from the story of Jacob, right? Jacob lays his head down on a stone and dreams and sees angels going up and down, right? Not down and up, but going up and down, showing that the divine presence is already on the planet, not just in heaven, right? And then wakes up and Jacob says, God was in this place and I did not know it.
Okay.
So the idea of the Hamakom, it looks like, I'll type
like it.
Like that.
Sorry to interfere with the more knowledgeable on that one.
Oh, please. No. Oh, John, all of us are on this journey together. I mean, and that's exactly the point. I mean, you've just illustrated, right? Here what did we have in this encounter? We had Moses trying to figure out how to get God to not kill the people. A very, very mundane, basic negotiation. Then we had Moses saying, God, come with us. Don't send us out there on our own. Be present with us.
Okay, if you're willing to indulge my ignorance, it's just been quite a surprise that all of this has been such a hard sell. You know, it's like, I will lead you out of Egypt. And they're like, no, we like it here. And, I'll lead you out of the wilderness. It seems like at every step, there's almost a fight, or not a fight perhaps, but certainly a lively debate as to whether or not they follow the Almighty in his agenda, the name's agenda.
John, I'm so pleased and impressed at your relative lack of experience with committee work.
Great. Sorry about that. I think I should apologize at this point again. So
No, because it's lovely. This notion that I could get a group of people to do what I want just because I happen to be God and I know the truth says it's look, I've walked into enough rooms where it was quite clear what the elephant in the room was. It was quite clear what the problem the group was facing was. And this is why consultants make money. Because the only person that those people will trust is somebody who they pay to have no vested interest in the outcome. And even then, the likelihood of them listening to the consultant is very small. There has never been anything.
I'm glad you find value in my knowledge of relatively nothing.
No, but this is who we are.
It might serve some purpose.
It's not just, but John, it's all of us. Do you know how long it took Steve Jobs, assistants and support staff and engineers to convince him to do the iPhone? He said no. It was years. He refused. Even after the iPod, he said, "What?" After putting music in everyone's pocket, he said no. He said, I don't want to touch phones. Phones are terrible. Phone companies suck. I don't want to deal with it. None of that. It's exactly
okay. So
the same.
in this simile, who is Steve Jobs exactly? Is it the rooms you walk into, the Hebrews? I mean, see my point. I'm sorry.
Steve Jobs is the authority figure.
Please continue. I don't want to obstruct.
Just people. It's just people, John. We all have our blinders on. And God doesn't serve as a role model for the divine here, but merely as one other person in the room where the power differential is different.
Yeah, that's what amazes me. I thought it was a much more absolute relationship. I thought that God was like a force of nature, and there wasn't any debate. There wasn't any hesitation. When the lightning struck, then you do what you're told, and it isn't that simple.
It has never been that simple. It wasn't that simple for the Israelites or the Egyptians or the Greeks or the Hindus. Everybody thinks we know better. And being told that we don't by anyone is no way of convincing us to do something different. And it doesn't matter if we're God, right? That being God in this situation is just having the bigger stick for the purpose of coercion. So,
wow.
Yeah, well, with that, I offer you this sort of concluding thought, which is what we are looking at here is a constant attempt to take coercion off the table. That society is built on cooperating in a common cause with one another and agreeing to the covenant, to the code that we've got together. And that one of the central principles of this, and the reason why we end with yet another covenantal moment in this parsha, is that after the Israelites don't abide by the covenant, they have to re-agree to it. All the parties need to come back to the table and say, okay, we agree again. And I think that's a good model for behavior, because it doesn't take much to partially break an agreement. And once it's partially broken, it needs to be repaired. We need to go back to the table and we need to say, okay, what did we agree to? Are we still agreed to it? Has it changed? And that's the essence of good human relationships.
Amen.
Amen. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.